What sounds like fiction, but is actually a real historical event? Welcome back to Reddit Chronicles. If you're new here, consider subscribing to help me feed my channel and grow my cat. And if you liked the video, do kindly give it a thumbs up to help me out. Let's get started. A Chinese emperor once ran in circles around a pillar to escape an assassin. He survived. I've used similar tactics with my father. 10 out of 10 would run around in circles again. Edit. No, he did not have jumper cables. Sorry to hear that your dad tried to assassinate you. Some guy in Australia decided he wanted to hunt rabbits, but rabbits don't live in Australia. So he then released like 12 in his backyard, and now there's a F-ton of rabbits in Australia. The Glasgow Ice Cream Wars. 6 people died in a turf war over ice cream van routes. They were dealing heroin out of the vans. I love my city so much. As the plane lands in Glasgow, passengers are reminded to set their watches back 25 years. Frankie Boyle. Jack, a baboon, was employed to change rail signals. After initial skepticism, the railway decided to officially employ Jack once his job competency was verified. The baboon was paid 20 cents a day and half a bottle of beer each week. It is widely reported that in his 9 years of employment with the railroad, Jack never made a mistake. I wonder what the salary negotiation was like. In 2007, a paraglider got trapped in the updraft of 2 joining thunderstorms and lifted to an altitude of 10 kilometers. She landed 3.5 hours later, about 60 kilometers north of her starting position, having survived extreme cold, lightning, and lack of oxygen. Imagine how effing scary that would be. She doesn't remember much of it since she became unconscious quite quickly. If I recall correctly, she regained consciousness when she was back down at 3,500 meters. Imagine how effing scary that would be. Yeah, waking up 3.5 kilometers in the air. I'd count that as scary. The marathon at the 1904 Olympics in St. Louis. The first place finisher did most of the race in a car. He had intended to drop out, and then got a car back to the stadium to get his change of clothes, and then kind of started jogging when he heard the fanfare. The second place finisher was carried across the finish line, legs technically twitching, by his trainer. They had been refusing him water and giving him a mixture of brandy and rat poison for the entire race. Doping wasn't illegal yet, and this was a terrible attempt at it, so he got the gold when the first guy was revealed. Third finisher was unremarkable, somehow. Fourth finisher was a Cuban mailman who had raised the funds to attend the Olympics by running non-stop across his entire country. He landed in New Orleans and promptly lost all of the traveling money on a riverboat casino. He ran the race in dress shoes and long trousers, cut off at the knees by a fellow competitor with a knife. He probably would have come in first, well, second behind the car, had it not been for the hour nap he took on the side of the track after eating rotten apples he found on the side of the race. 9th and 12th finishers were from South Africa and ran barefoot. South Africa didn't actually send a delegation. These were students who just happened to be in town and thought it sounded fun. 9th was chased a mile off course by angry dogs. Note, these are the first Africans to compete in any modern Olympics. Half of the participants had never raced competitively before. Some died. St. Louis had only one water stop on the entire path. This, coupled with the dusty road, was exacerbated by the cars kicking up dust, led to the above fatalities, and yet, somehow, rat poison guy survived to get the gold. The Russian delegation arrived a week later because they were still using the Julian calendar in 1904. Seriously, this needs to be a movie. A town in France nearly danced itself to death in 1518 because of a dancing plague. My first genuine "what?" in this thread. That's effing wild. Why has this not been tapped into for fiction stories? I want to read a post-apocalypse story from the perspective of a survivor of the global dancing plague. Imagine infected people not coughing or getting any flu-like symptoms, but instead looking elated, full of energy, happy, then dancing with other infected until they fell down dead, still smiling and twitching while others dance on. Name the disease and the book. Foxtrot. One interesting theory is that they had consumed ergot, a psychoactive fungus that can grow on grain in certain conditions. They were unknowingly baking this tainted grain into their daily bread, and as a result, were constantly high as balls. As the dancing plague worsened, concerned nobles sought the advice of local physicians, who ruled out astrological and supernatural causes, instead announcing that the plague was a natural disease caused by hot blood. However, instead of prescribing bleeding, authorities encouraged more dancing, in part by opening 2 guild halls and a grain market, and even constructing a wooden stage. The authorities did this because they believed that the dancers would recover only if they danced continuously day and night. To increase the effectiveness of the cure, authorities even paid for musicians to keep the afflicted moving. The strategy was a disaster. After those policies were applied, the illness underwent a dramatic growth. Performing dances in more public places facilitated the spread of the psychic contagion. Good strategy, guys. I would like to meet the physician who ruled out astrological and supernatural causes. Okay guys, I checked, and it's for sure not enchantments by the devil. It's also not the dance god, Terpsichore, nor is it the alignment of Mercury and the moon. Also, I'm pretty sure it's not a witch, nor is it a warlock. In the 1800s, there were street vendors in Egypt who sold ancient Egyptian mummies, just lined them up on a street corner and sold them like they were an umbrella on a rainy day. English tourists would buy them to display as oddities. If only they were displayed. Edit. Thanks for the silver. Now I know what horrors I have to find to get upvotes. I'm not clicking that link. The longest piano piece of any kind is Vexations by Eric Satie. It consists of a 180-note composition, which, on the composer's orders, must be repeated 840 times, so that the whole performance is 18 hours 40 minutes. Its first reported public performance in September 1963 in the Pocket Theater, New York City, required a relay team of 10 pianists. The New York Times critic fell asleep at 4 a.m., and the audience dwindled to 6 masochists. At the conclusion, one sadomasochist shouted, "Encore!" The Great Stink of London in 1858. One summer, the heat dried up the River Thames, where all the human waste went, and an unbearable smell pervaded throughout the entire city. All Parliament representatives were eventually coerced out of their homes outside of London to convene and solve the issue. Much to the citizens' glee, Parliament was held in their building on the bank of the River Thames, resulting in one of the fastest Parliament decisions ever made to reform the London sewer system. The rise and fall of Alexander the Great never lost a battle in his life, conquered the whole known world, and only stopped because his soldiers were tired, and then died of flu when he was like 32. Honestly, his life should be a vaccine commercial. No matter how great you are, vaccines will save your life. That's a genius idea. Actually, a super good idea. Alexander the Great was king at 18, fought off assassins for years, beat back and conquered the whole world. Role of a super hot fit dude sword fighting with a bunch of bigger, hotter dudes. But he couldn't fight off the flu. Neither can you. Role of same hot dude vomiting and dying. No matter how great you are, get vaccinated. Return of Napoleon. An army was sent to intercept him, and they ended up fighting for him. If it were shown in a movie, most people would have considered it cheesy and unrealistic. There were a few Japanese soldiers who refused to surrender after World War II and remained on duty in the rainforest for 30 years after the war ended. There was one here in the Philippines. This guy never knew the war ended decades ago and stayed in his position like he did during the war. He lived in a jungle forest, away from the then current world. Apparently, they found his captain years and years later, old and retired. His captain asked him to return home, to Japan, because Japan lost and the war had already ended. He refused to believe that Japan lost the war. Eventually, his captain convinced him and he returned back to Japan. To add, he fought residents passing along his station area. All of his war weapons were rusted and had no bullets. But the residents ignored him and thought he was a war freak lunatic. He was malnourished and frail and never spoke the Filipino language. But the residents expressed their concern to the government to take the poor man back to Japan. The representatives of the Philippine government had to gather news clippings and articles of proof that World War II was over and Japan had surrendered. They showed this to him, and he still refused to believe. He said he'll only follow orders from his captain. So then the government had to blindly assume that his captain was still alive and contacted Japan to do the searching. Luckily, the captain was indeed still alive, but very old. True to his word, he followed his captain's orders and went home. The assassination of Rasputin reads like a cartoon. The assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand too. Guess back then assassinations just had a slapstick look and feel. Check out the CIA's assassinations attempts on Castro. Some highlights include planting a bomb in a large seashell and then painting it bright colors and placing it on the ocean floor in hopes Castro would see it while swimming and pick it up. Exploding cigars. Poisoned cigars that were supposed to be given to Castro, but were instead given to an unknown individual. Spraying Castro's broadcasting station with LSD. Poisoning Castro's shoes so that his beard would fall out. Poisoning a chocolate milkshake. Only the pills froze together in the freezer and shattered before they could be placed in the shake. Contaminating a diving suit with a toxic fungus and giving it to Castro, only for the man set to deliver the suit to decide to give him a higher quality diving suit. A ballpoint pen with a very fine hypodermic needle. Today I learned that the CIA used to be run by Wile E. Coyote. The town of Rothenburg ob der Tauber in Germany, one of the country's oldest and most preserved cities. Essentially, during the 30-Year War, the Catholic Army wanted to destroy the town because they resisted the church. Count von Tilly, sounds like a Monty Python name, was going to destroy the town, but as a gesture of peace, the town offered him a mass, 3.25 liters, of wine. He declared that if anyone in the town could drink the mass of wine in one go, he would spare the town and move on. Then someone just walked up and did it, so the army left. Much later during World War II, when the US was performing air raids, someone in the White House knew of this town and pleaded that we do not destroy it, so it has been saved from 2 wars, all because one guy chugged a bunch of wine. That's a solid excuse for alcoholism. Hans, don't you think you've had enough? We would all be dead with that attitude, Ingrid. The entire Taiping Rebellion, a war started by a Chinese peasant who dreamed and believed he was Jesus' younger brother. Although poor, the first thing he did was have a giant demon-slaying sword forged and took over a city. Asked the British why they wouldn't pay him tribute as the new head of their faith and engaged in total war with the Qing. Applied pseudo-communist policies like abolishing private property, separated women and men from ever interacting, and sent the women to the front lines. Over 20 million people died, with some estimates as high as 40 million. It was the 4th deadliest conflict in human history. It killed more people than World War I. Only World War II, transition of the Ming, and the Qing conquest of the Ming were deadlier. The first thing he did was have a giant demon-slaying sword forged and took over a city. Ha ha ha, this is great. Over 20 million people died. Oh. During World War II, the Polish army conscripted a bear. Oh man, you're selling this short. They didn't conscript Wojtek. They enlisted him when command specifically said they couldn't take him when they deployed. The bear was given rations, a bunk, even beer and cigarettes just like any other soldier. And he actually served in the field. The unit was responsible for distributing munitions like artillery shells, and Wojtek, and I'm not joking here, would help them move crates. The bear would literally pick up 100-pound crates of shells by himself and stack them where they needed to go. Wojtek was not a mascot enlisted for giggles. The bear was a soldier. If you want more where that came from, simply click on one of these boxes right here. And if you liked the video, I assume you did since you're still here, share it with your friends to see what they think. And of course, if you haven't already, click the kitty to subscribe and you'll never miss another video. I'll see you in the next episode of Reddit Chronicles.